Well, I was just going to say with once they get, we're still just talking about the 3-week extension here. What about the broader picture of trying to get full year appropriations done? Are they going to do that? Or are they just going to kick the can down the road and do a full year continuing resolution, which would essentially freeze things at last year's level for the rest of the year?
No, I think they are. Every indication so far, and of course things can break down as we know, but every indication so far is they are pretty determined to get this omnibus spending package done. The deadline would be March 11. It looks like they're really negotiating now behind the scenes to make that happen. And we sort of know that because reading the tea leaves here, you know, when the lawmakers are all screaming at each other very publicly in the press, it's because nothing is happening. When everybody's refusing to talk, it means there's deal making going on. and we don't know what the latest deal is, but they're talking right now. And so that's why we had this unusual situation of last week where the top appropriators of both parties came out and said, we finally, after all these months, we finally reached a preliminary kind of what they called a framework for an appropriations deal. And by the way, we're not going to tell you anything about what we agreed to. That was the message. They literally wouldn't say anything about what was in there and what they had just agreed to, supposedly. But that tells you that, it tells me first that the framework deal is very fragile and they maybe haven't worked out all the detailed numbers yet. And so they're worried about discussing anything that might then blow up in their face if it goes sour. But it also tells me they're close and they are pretty determined now to get a deal together. And the main thing we know about the deal, Bob, is there has been for months, this whole thing has been tied up over this fight over what's called parity. Republicans have been pushing for equal increases between defense and non-defense spending. That's been their bottom line insistence, saying without that, we won't agree to anything. And, you know, this is Biden's first budget, we should say. It's been over a year, so it's hard to remember that because everything's been delayed for so long. But, you know, this budget request came a year ago now, almost a year ago, right? I mean, this is his very first budget proposal of the new administration that they're still wrestling with. And the Democrats, you know, this is the first time they're in power. They've got the Senate, the House, and the White House. And what's made this budget so difficult, I think, in particular, is Democrats were trying to use this budget to ram through a lot of domestic spending because they say it's been sorely underinvested in education and health, in environment funding for years with Republicans in power. And so Biden came out with this budget that was lopsided in that direction. And he proposed, remember, it was more than a 16% increase in the non-defense spending is what Biden wanted. And he gave defense less than a 2% increase, which doesn't even keep up with inflation. So Republicans would argue it's actually a cut to defense. And that was the mismatch. And that's why this process has been stuck for months with no movement, and why we're on our third stopgap bill is because of this huge mismatch between defense and non-defense, which shows you the competing fiscal priorities of Republicans and Democrats in very stark terms. But look, in a 50-50 Senate, that's a hard thing to untangle, right? I mean, there's no give there. 50-50, you know, both sides have to give to get anything done, and neither side was willing to budge for months. And of course, with the pandemic raging, all the time and focus was really on emergency pandemic aid, not regular appropriations, which got on the back burner here. So for a combination of reasons, this thing has just been stuck for months. But just last week, they did announce what they called this framework deal. No one really knows what it is, but apparently it's some kind of form of parity that both sides can live with. Now, we don't know the details of how that's going to translate into numbers yet, but that tells me they're pretty close in the numbers that they can. I'm hearing they're getting the appropriators getting all their sub allocations going now. So they're working out the numbers to make it work. But it sounds like major progress. It sounds like they're determined to get it done and pass it before March 11. of course, anything can always unravel, particularly in a 50-50 Senate.
Mhm. Sticking with the issue of parity for a second, I think we all at the beginning of the year figured that we'd have Build Back Better passed by now, which was going to carry a whole bunch of non-defense spending on it. The fact that Build Back Better is, at least the previous House version, is dead. Did that gum up has that gummed up the appropriations bill a little bit? And that you've got progressives that are saying, hey, Build Back Better isn't moving. I'm trying to get all of my spending priorities, onto the omnibus bill, which sort of upsets the whole parity issue. And then on the question of parity, are we talking about parity in percentage terms, percentage increases in defense versus non-defense? Are we talking about parity in terms of dollar increases? And I know they said that they didn't have a framework yet, but I was wondering if you have any best guesses on how they're going to do that, because obviously both sides need to be able to declare victory, right? Republicans need to be able to say, hey, we got parity increase defense with non-defense, and progressives need to be able to say, hey, we're spending more in all these other areas than previously. So what are your thoughts about all of that?
You raise an excellent question. Is it a percentage increase or a dollar increase parity? The answer is anybody who knows ain't talking. We don't know. We just don't know. We pressed, Richard Shelby is a pretty talkative guy, the ranking Republican on Senate Appropriations. We pressed him repeatedly on that very question. Is a parity percentage increase or in dollars? And he dodged around that 100 times, and it was clear he wasn't going to divulge that. So we don't know how these numbers are going to translate yet. We're just going to have to hang on and see what they do, because I think it's a fragile thing, and they're not willing to tip their hand on that yet. So that's to wait and see. And on your other point, you raise a very good point on the Build Back Better, because that is going to be a frustration, I think. With Build Back Better not going anywhere, at least anytime soon, I would think there is going to be a temptation on the part of Democrats to try to cram some of that money into this omnibus package. But as you point out, Tori, that upsets the defense, non-defense balance. They may not be able to do that very readily. Now, I've heard no talk that they're actually trying to combine these measures. I don't think they really can, because of this very problem. In order to get a bipartisan deal here, they can't upset the apple cart. And if they try to cram all the Build Back Better stuff into here, the numbers aren't going to work. So I don't think that's really an option. But sure, maybe on the margins here and there, is there a program, a smaller dollar program that was in Build Back Better that they could stick into the omnibus? Yeah, they may try to look for ways to do that, but they're still holding out hope for some kind of Build Back Better plan, after this thing.